but also the impression was that she was a vulnerable woman, that she was married, she was...
Based on what she writes in her emails back to him, did you get an impression that she was about her?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what was your impression of her?
That she was emotionally...
Patient hearsay.
Sustained.
Judge, may we approach?
Sustained.
All right, Ms. LaViolette, in this particular email with this woman named Chriselle, you said that it was of a very graphic sexual nature?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And this was at the end of March of 2008?
Yes, it was.
Judge, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
I'm handing you, Ms. LaViolette, what's been marked in Exhibit 594. Do you recognize this as a journal entry from Mr. Alexander's journal?
Yes.
Okay, so this is something that, based on it coming from his journal, you would understand it was something he wrote.
Yes.
All right, and we're looking at March 27th of 2008.
Yes.
In this particular journal entry, is Mr. Alexander talking about the move that Jodi is making back to California?
Yes, he is.
And is he talking, what is the subject matter of this?
He's talking about the move. Overruled. The move is something that will be good for both of them, that discipline is hard and that he will miss her, but that the move will be good for both of them in terms of him wanting to get married and move on, and both of them in terms of a sexual sense, I believe. But he talks about their lack of discipline a little bit.
Okay. Does he talk about himself needing more discipline?
Yes.
Okay. And March 30th, so just a few days away from this journal entry. And just so we are clear on where we're at in the relationship, by late March, Mr. Alexander obviously knows, because Jodi has told him that she is moving home, back to California.
Yes.
And on March 30th of 2008, was there an argument over text messages? I mean, not about text messages. Did they have an argument that you can read about through text messages between Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias?
Yes.
All right. And what was the subject matter of the argument?
There was a text message late in the evening from Mr. Alexander to Miss Arias, and she was half asleep, didn't respond really well. Maybe approach? All right, we were talking about the text messages on March 30th of 2008. Yes.
Was there from reading your review of these text messages, was there an argument going on between Mr. Alexander and Jodi?
Yes, there was.
All right, and in this argument, is Mr. Alexander upset because Miss Arias hung up on him?
Yes, he is.
Overall.
Yes, he is.
And does she explain that she's upset with him that she hung up because he was swearing at her?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question. You're going to repeat it.
The question is does does she explain that why she hung up because he was swearing at her?
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
And these text messages, when they're arguing with each other over these text messages, last about 35, 40 minutes?
Yes.
The fact that Ms. Arias was able to hang up on Mr. Alexander after swearing at her, does that speak to her ability to start to have some boundaries?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And is that further evidence of her pulling away from him?
Yes, when she establishes boundaries, it's because she's being able to distance.
Okay. And just because we're talking about her establishing being able to establish a boundary or being able to, on this particular occasion, not tolerate his swearing, does that mean she's completely out of the relationship?
No, not at all.
All right. And this is something that you see in your practice and your expertise with battered women, that they can have a moment where they're able to stand up to the abuser and then they go right back to them?
Yes, they do.
On April 1st, right after this argument that they have, on March 30th, does Mr. Alexander, in his own words, does he send a text to Ms. Arias about how much he's going to miss her? And the timing on that text, if you need to find it, is April 1st at 5:45.
Yes. Yes, he does.
And in that text message is, from your impression from that text message, based on what he says in there, is he apologetic?
He's apologetic and says she's a fantastic person.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
He's apologetic and he says she's a fantastic person. All right, as we move into April of 2008, this is the month that Ms. Arias leaves. Is that right? Is that right? Yes.
Okay. And was there something else that was important to you about the April 1st text?
I think what was really important about the April 1st text was him saying that, or the impression
Yes.
is that if he had treated her half as well as she deserved, they would have never had an argument.
Okay. So, and when I asked you about apologetic, is that where you're getting that from?
I'm getting the apology from that, yes.
All right. And do you see abusive men in your groups? Do you see them doing this type of thing where they start to blame themselves or they're taking on blame for how the relationship is?
It depends on the person, but many of them certainly feel remorse. They certainly are sorry. It's more the ability to go forward with that. It's more the ability to continue to act on being sorry. And for many of the folks that I've worked with, it's sort of the world as it affects me kind of remorse. It's, I feel bad, you might leave, or you might have a bad impression of me, so I'm going to do what it takes to sort of win you back. But over time, there's a development of genuine remorse. You have to be able to look at yourself before you can do that.
Okay. Is that something that, in order to get the men in your group, is that something that you're attempting to get them to that point where they're able to look at it in an honest way?
Yes, and you have to feel good enough about yourself to look at yourself honestly. So they have to be in the program long enough, and it depends on where they start, because everybody starts at a different place, so it depends on how far somebody has to go before they're able to look at themselves. I mean, some people begin to look at themselves relatively rapidly, and other people, it takes them a lot longer.
Okay. All right, I want to talk about in April, there's a fourth violent incident. Is that right?
Yes, there is.
Okay. And in that particular incident, did you speak to Jodi about it?
Yes, I did.
And what is it that you learned that happened that's important to you?
There was an argument about her being interested in two other men. And when she talked about that, which was elicited from a conversation that they had, not just volunteered, but elicited, when that happened, Mr. Alexander got very angry, and he threw her down, straddled her, and choked her.
Are you aware of how severe the choking was?
She lost consciousness, and she woke up coughing a little while later.
All right. What does choking mean to you? I know yesterday we talked about the conflict tactics scale. Where's choking?
Choking's on the severe end, and for many of the women I work with, they don't get choked. Choking is very personal, it's very close up, and it's, life-threatening. So it's a very serious form of abuse from my perspective.
Do you see any type of an escalation when we talk about the physical violence that's happening in 2008 and the emotional abuse that's happening in 2008? Do you see escalation?
I see escalation. We're talking about just about a month's difference. We went from October to January, January to March. Now it's March to April, and the verbal abuse is starting to escalate as well.
At the same time?
Right. Based on the text messages and the other print messages that I've read.
Okay. When speaking to Jodi about what happened on this particular day, did she talk to you about whether or not she tried to defend herself against him?
She said she started to defend herself, but she was afraid she would hurt him, and she stopped. Is that inconsistent with women that you've talked to before, about other battered women that you spoke to before? No, it's not inconsistent when I've taken self-defense classes and women don't even want to hit somebody. It's the experience of physical contact or contact sports and fighting in the playground or whatever. Most women don't have that kind of experience. There are women that do, definitely, but most women don't have that kind of experience, and so they're uncomfortable with it, and for many, uncomfortable about hurting somebody else.
So at this point, so she says that she ended up not wanting to hurt him, and that was her reasoning?
Yes.
All right, and did she also lose consciousness?
Yes.
What about minimizing? When you speak to Jodi about some of these incidents, especially the physical incidents, and I guess too the emotional abuse, do you see any minimizing that's going on?
I see a fair amount of minimizing that's going on.
And before you go on with that, specifically with Jodi, can you talk to us about what minimizing is? Minimizing
is just taking an incident and making it less important or less significant than it might be to somebody else. That an outsider might look at it and see it as a bigger thing than the person who's describing it. And in your experience, do battered women minimize the abuse that they've taken? Many of battered women minimize the abuse that they were taking, that has happened. In your experience, why do they do that? Well, a number of reasons. One is that it's hard to take in something that is very painful to you. It's easier to sort of make it less than it is. The other thing is that with the gradual nature, the gradual escalation of domestic violence, what used to be a misdemeanor, or what used to be a crime, is a misdemeanor. So that, for instance, maybe I said to myself, nobody will ever lay a hand on me, and then somebody lays a hand on me, and that's part of what happens. Or nobody will ever call me this kind of a name, and they call me this kind of a name, and that's happening. and I'm not ready to leave that relationship and I'm tied in for all those other reasons, then I learned that that's just the way somebody is, and maybe they're going to do that, but they're not going to go any further until they go further. So that's part of the gradual nature for most of these cases is one of the other reasons that people minimize.
Okay. Have you seen battered women minimize the abuser's actions in an effort to protect the abuser's reputation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or not talk about it at all.
Or not talk about it at all. And we talked about that yesterday, about how common it is to not report, not call the doctor, not call the police, right?
Yes.
Specifically with Jodi, and speaking with Jodi, did you detect minimization from her?
Yes, from the very first time that I interviewed her. She really didn't talk about the domestic violence very much. She didn't want to see herself as somebody who was abused, and she talked about it as isolated instances without looking at the sort of rapid escalation.
What about the verbal abuse? Does she minimize that?
She minimizes it throughout the IMs and the text messages as sort of, she moves on after a very, what I would consider a very aggressive and demeaning argument. She moves on to regular kinds of conversation. And she calls it rude. I would have other names for it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about some of those times, because now we're in April, and you were talking about how April you start to see an escalation. Is that right, in violence?
Yes. Well, I don't start to see it. I started to see it before, and I'm seeing more.
Okay, so you're seeing more as we get to April.
Yes.
Okay. All right, on April 7th, all right, I'm looking at April 7th. Let me do this. And actually, this is in evidence as Exhibit 444. So, do we see on the beginning of April 7th, when we're talking about where he's asking her, where are you? You see that?
Yes.
And she answers in Hollister with a smiley face.
Yes.
And so do you see basically a normal conversation?
Yes.
And then we skip to a few hours later, and we see this long text message, right?
Yes.
And based on the fact that it's outgoing, that means it's coming from Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to zoom it in so we can see it. And so just hours prior to this text message, we have a normal conversation, right?
Yes, we do.
All right, and then he starts this with, do not call me and do not text me anything, right?
Yes.
And it appears that he wants information from her. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you speak to Ms. Arias about what this tirade is about?
Yes.
And so do you have a background understanding of what Mr. Alexander wanted from her?
Yes.
What is that?
He wanted the identity of a woman who had come to her restaurant and reported to her that Mr. Alexander had a significant relationship with Lisa Andrews and wanted her to know about that.
And was this significant relationship with Lisa Andrews during the time that he was also with Jodi?
Yes.
Okay. And so in this particular text message, he's talking about her getting that information to him right away.
Yes.
And he's demanding that it takes 15 minutes, and she won't take the 15 minutes to do that. Is that right?
Yes.
And he's accusing her of lying about it, isn't he?
Yes.
And he starts to talk about that she better tell the truth or give me your imaginary friend with the worst BS story you have ever told, or leave me alone.
Yeah.
Right? But yet, instead of leaving her alone, he continues in his tirade, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
He talks to her about how it's a lie like no other. It's freaking foolish, right?
Yes.
and there's no way out. You've screwed up your story so bad you can't mend it.
Yes.
And this is all he's talking about, is the fact that a woman told her he was in another relationship at the same time he was in a relationship with Jodi, right?
Yes.
And he's from this text message, can you tell whether or not he seems upset about that?
Seems very upset about it, very angry about it.
All right. Now the anger then turns into threats, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
He talks about, you have till tomorrow to give me this person's information. And then he threatens her, right?
Yes, he does.
He threatens to tell the Hugheses, which we know at that point are his good friends, and in January of 2007, they loved Jodi, right?
Yes.
To tell the Hugheses, to tell her friend Leslie Udy, and anyone else that matters about all the crazy things that you've done, right?
Yes.
And then he tells her to either fess up, right?
Yes,
To
he
fess
does.
up or feel his wrath.
Yes.
And he tells her that no matter how bad the truth is, he promises that the punishment will be worse than the lie. Is that right?
Punishment will be better.
Oh, I'm sorry. Punishment will be better than the lie.
Yes.
And again, he talks to her about truth. Nothing else from you until the truth, right?
Yes.
And then he ends that with, after tomorrow it's going to get real bad for you. Time to spit it out.
Yes.
In this particular text message, he keeps accusing her of lying, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
And he's accusing her of lying about information that is bad about him, right?
Yes, it is.
But based on all your reading and review of the materials, was this true? That he was in a relationship with Lisa Andrews at the same time he was in a relationship with Jodi?
Yes, he
It's true.
approach.
May continue.
Ms. Violet, have you read through Ms. Andrews' interviews and emails and written communications?
Yes.
Are you aware of when she had a relationship with Mr. Alexander?
From July of '07 through March of '08.
And during that time, are you aware of whether or not Mr. Alexander was also in a relationship with Jodi Arias?
Yes, he was.
Okay, so when Mr. Alexander is accusing Ms. Arias of lying about bad information about him,
Right.
that's what we're talking about in the text, right?
Yes.
That bad information is actually something that happened, isn't it? Being in a relationship with two different women.
Just a speculation, like a foundation.
She laid the foundation.
Yes, in fact, Miss Andrews, he has a similar conversation with Miss Andrews in one of their communications where he's suggesting to Miss Andrews that if she listens to other people, she's going to get false information about him.
Okay. So based on his communications with Ms. Andrews, basically telling her not to believe things that she hears about him, right?
Right.
And now he's upset with Ms. Arias for saying, I heard something bad about you.
Yes.
In this particular text message is is it important to you how long this text message is, or how he words things to Jodi in this text message?
Well, there are veiled threats in it, and I mean the threats, are sort of nondescript, some of them, but some of them are talking about telling people that she cares about. I don't know what crazy things he's talking about. I don't know if he's talking about the sexual things. I can't imagine that would be there because that would include him. So I'm not certain what he's talking about.
Is the important part to you the fact that he's threatening to talk badly about her to her close